What is up, everyone, and welcome back to another video on the Winning Mentality YouTube channel. And today we have got a very, very special guest with us. We have got GB rower Morgan Baynham-Williams. I do hope I haven't ruined your name there.
No, you did it well.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad. Plowing out these interviews and trying to broaden my horizons a bit. Rowing's not my sport. I mean, I like watching it and I like doing it on the Olympic Games on the old PlayStation and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm trying to learn today. And Morgan, what better person to learn from? So we'll start off with you, really. What was your first rowing memory? What got you into rowing?
So I got into rowing when I was 10 years old, and that was as part of a multi-sports campaign in my local town of Ross and Wye. I was playing football at the time, and we were getting fairly unfit in the off season. So we were looking for a sport that played all year round, and there was a rowing club. So we went and we were part of the first junior academy down in Ross and Wye at their rowing club within their rowing facilities. And yeah, that's how I got into it.
Ross on Wye, what a great place that is. But anyway, yeah, probably the only like successful person to come out of Ross on Wye, I reckon. So yeah, you went to Ross Rowing Club, and you mentioned you were playing football. So what really focused you on rowing? Did you find you had a sort of a natural knack at it?
Well, so I'm a coxswain or a coxswain, which is basically if you see them racing in the big boats, which are eights, they're the small person who looks like they're just shouting at them. Yeah. But they're actually the steersman of the boat, so they're responsible for dictating where the boat goes and the tactics and how the race plan is actually initiated. So they're kind of like the jockey of people within rowing. And that discipline itself, I got into really when I was about 16, 17, as a result of being quite skinny and not as muscular as the athletes who were racing for Great Britain. And I thought, well, you know, I would like to race for my country, but it's unlikely that I can compete with such big athletes. And at a junior level, there's no lightweight rowing category, so you can either hack it at the big leads with the big people, or you can be a cox. And so I ended up getting into the national team as a cox from that point on.
Yeah. So what sort of differences do you have? Do you think more about, you know, the tactics of it more than anything? So how did you make the transition from just general team member or singular, I don't know, to being a cox?
When I learnt to row, you learnt to do everything at once. So you learnt to row actually physically, and you learnt how to steer, and you learnt how to cox. That was all part of the learning progression as a young 10-year-old. So coming into that, and that's kind of very different from a private school approach to rowing. So school rowing is very different to club level, because you come in as a rower and you predominantly stay as a rower, and coxes have often never rowed before. Whereas my introduction to the sport was very different. If you wanted to go out rowing, you had to have a cox, because we'd be in a cox boat. So we took it in turns, and we'd go out in quads, which is 4 people or 4 athletes rowing with 1 cox steering. And we'd row, you know, 500-600 meters, and then we'd all swap over. And so the actual transition from rowing as a kind of hobby and racing on a local circuit to being an international cox wasn't too steep, because I'd already been coxing, and that's something that I just knew was part of rowing itself. What was strange was then knowing that my role within the Great Britain team would only be as the tactician, as a coxswain. It wouldn't be a physical role, and I could have no physical influence on boat speed. Everything would come from mental or cognitive cues or triggers.
Yeah. So talk to me about the sort of development system in GB rowing. Obviously, there've been a lot of famous medalists in recent years, and the whole of it has developed. So, talk to me how that has increased in its sort of efficiency in the last few years, especially as someone who's obviously going through it.
So there's a very clear development pathway. You've got junior level, under 23 level. You'll have development seniors, and then you have the senior Olympic team. And you can, they kind of call it like a little bit of a train. Once you get in one aspect, whether that's as a junior or as an under 23, you're almost on that train. You're exposed to that world and that environment and how that development works. And you'll receive a lot of support from coaches and different practitioners along the way in terms of your development and what's best for you and your rowing career. But the other thing is there's a real increase in the quality of rowing at university level. Some of the top rowing universities in the world are located in the UK, and Oxford Brookes is one of the most outstanding university boat club programs worldwide. And so the knowledge that there is actually within the country is really exceptional. And there's a real effort from the national team and British rowing to try to educate all the way through to grassroots level. So even now, whilst we're going through, the coronavirus pandemic, there's opportunities for webinars and education online for coaches, athletes and coxes, all around the country.
So talk to me about any coaches or mentors that have been influential on your development as a cox.
Initially, I was coached by a gentleman called Ian Howe. He was responsible for setting up the junior academy at Ross Rowing Club, and he took me to my junior Great Britain trials each year that I went, and was highly supportive and engaged in my development. And I also worked with another gentleman called Malcolm Pobjoy, and he really specialised in working with masters rowers. So back then it would have been called veteran rowing. So anyone above the age of 27, he was working with, and that's at club level. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to race with some of his men's rowers and go around racing at masters level and pick up some wins at that point. But moving through more towards the senior level, in 2016 I went to Oxford University, and I chose to go and join the women's boat club as opposed to the men's boat club for the opportunity to work with a woman called Christine Wilson. And she has truly been one of the most spectacular and phenomenal people I've ever met. And in terms of rowing coaching, she is truly incredible. And that's certainly shaped the more recent years of my coxing career and an understanding and knowledge within the sport of rowing itself. But there are some outstanding coaches on the national team, certainly. And that kind of seems like an expectation that they would be top of the range, but it can be quite challenging to make sure that the right people are in the right places. But the coaches on the national team really are very good at their job, and they're certainly people that you learn from day in, day out.
Yeah. So you talk about having like the right people in the right places. When you're with a team and you're basically in charge of where they're going and what they're doing, do you find yourself having to establish a rapport with them beforehand, and so they really, really respect you? And how important is that when you're racing?
I think that respect is something that's earned. And people often tell me, or people often ask me when I'm working with, a prime example is I'm 5'6", and I will often train with and work in squads of male rowers who are all 6'4", big characters, between the ages of 22 to 32. And people will say, how do you control them? And my response is, well, I don't try to. They're all adults and they will make their own decisions. All I ever do is ask somebody to do something, and they have an understanding that I will only ask them to do something that is in the best interest of boat speed. And that's where the respect comes from, and my ability to command a crew in a racing situation comes from that kind of, it's not really a relaxed grip, but you know, we are all adults in the sport and we all choose to be there. You know, it's not something we participate in because we get lots of money for it. It's something we do because we've got a real desire to be the best in the country. And that mutual understanding is enough to make sure when it's crunch time and they do need to respond, they will.
So what is your end goal in your career? Because we talk about it often with people. So what would you say is the pinnacle for you in rowing?
My end goal, I guess, or ultimate goal, is to cox at the Olympic Games. I think that's most sportsmen and women's dream. And I think the further into being a member of the senior team I get, or the more experience I get working with that team, the clearer I see that it is an attainable goal. But I also see how challenging that is and how much work really needs to go into creating those opportunities, so that once you're there, you perform and you can create a podium finish. Yeah.
So more onto you personally. So how have you managed to find the right balance between education and rowing? Because obviously you picked it up when you were 10, you carried on doing it more as a hobby, and then you found a career path within it. How have you managed to find the perfect life balance there?
I think perfection is something that's a bit difficult to strive for, but I've always found that I've been very keen to participate in sport, and that's been something that's been a fundamental part of my life from a very young age. But when I was actually at school, I went to a community school in Newent, in Gloucestershire, and we didn't have a rowing team, so rowing was something that I did as an extracurricular activity outside of school time. And I wouldn't say I was exceptionally academic. I was probably normal average grades, and I knew that I always had a passion for sports science, and I think my understanding of what it takes to kind of just work in sport, even at a grassroots level through to a higher level, that was something that really fueled my academics. And I went to Oxford Brookes University and I studied sports science there as my undergraduate degree. And it wasn't until I got to Brookes that I actually saw my academic potential. And I think that really came through because I was doing something that I loved. And I was studying something that I knew would help me both within rowing, and the rowing would help me in my degree itself. But I think what's so critical is if you're doing something that you really love and that you're passionate about, you will excel in that field. And I really do believe if I hadn't have been rowing and been so passionate about rowing, I wouldn't have had the opportunities I have had in my academia. That those kind of things that have been created as a result of that.
Absolutely. And do you think that it's that passion and drive that has been the ongoing force that's carried you upwards towards obviously where your end goal is? And do you think it will continue to do so?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's instinct to follow something that you really, really enjoy. And as long as you're enjoying something, it's easier to continue to seek out what that goal might be. And I do think that the enjoyment is a really, really critical part of that. But being, I'm obviously a very driven person, and I think that's a characteristic of a lot of athletes, and I'd say high academic professionals as well. But I think through learning and being willing to be vulnerable, and seek out those opportunities where you could fail, but not being fearful of that failure, I think that's really, really important for driving something. You know, we can develop and improve through failing, and that doesn't mean that that's an end point. Actually, failure is just an opportunity for us to learn and then progress.
And coming towards the end now, but what in terms of rowing, do you see yourself staying involved? Obviously, coxing isn't as much of a physical demand as you said. So how long do you see yourself staying in the sport of rowing? Do you think it's a lifetime career, or do you think that there's certain other areas you want to explore? What would you say to that?
I think rowing will be something that I will be involved in for all of my life. I think that I take a lot of enjoyment right now out of coaching. I coached on my first under-23 World Championships last year in Sarasota. And that was a really fantastic opportunity. It was an opportunity for me as a coach to get my first kind of international experience from that side of coaching, but also it was great to give younger athletes an opportunity to race at their first World Championships. And coaching is definitely something that I am passionate about. I think that through my involvement in rowing, I've really learned a wealth of knowledge, which I think is important that is shared. And I think there's a lot that I can give back to the rowing community. And just the fact that I really enjoy it so much. It's something that my family are involved in. I've got a lot of friends in it. And, you know, even if it's just coming back to Ross and helping out there and just getting involved, then that's definitely something that will be part of my life.
Absolutely. It's a great way to be, and to be really engrossed in it. It's fantastic to hear it and to see. So if you win an Olympic gold medal, and this is very hypothetical here, what's the reaction?
I think for a lot of people, it's probably relief. You know, the winning of the medal itself happens throughout the day-to-day grind. The slog, that's where the winning really takes place, and you are almost relieved when you've crossed that finish line and know that actually you've done the job that you set out to do. I think that it's almost very military in its approach, that you become trained to win. You know, that's what you're trained to do, and anything else might be seen as a failure initially, but then I would imagine through retrospect, you know, there's a lot more positive feelings that can perhaps come out from it. But I think obviously, you know, you've got all the great feelings of you're, you know, very happy and proud and excited and all those things. But I really do think the relief's probably quite a big part of that. And I certainly know athletes who have gone and achieved, you know, gold, silver medals at the Olympic Games, and they're certainly, when they've got those gold medals, do feel quite relieved when they cross the finish line and realise that they've done it, that initial thought. And then, you know, maybe a few minutes later, then the happiness kicks in.
And finally, what would you say to a novice rower to get them into the sport?
I just think go and give it a go. You never know what you're going to enjoy, and rowing takes on all kinds of people in it. You don't have to be a particular person. You can just go and get involved. So take the opportunities when they're there, and it's, you know, just a chance to try something new, and, you know, it might pay off.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, Morgan. I've learned a lot about rowing, so that's always helpful, trying to broaden our horizons. Thank you to George as well for recommending you from Ross Rowing Club. He was a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, you should chat to her." So that was great stuff. On this channel coming up, we've got lots of good content for you. We've got stuff from This Is My Club, which you've seen a couple of episodes of, as well as a few retrospectives. And yeah, Morgan, is there any social medias that you want to shout out before we go?
I've got Instagram, so at MorganBW7, but that's about it really. I'm not so huge on the Twitter front, but I just post a few pics of rowing and a few vids. If you like rowing, if not, then probably not.
That's great stuff. Okay, thank you very much for watching, everyone, and we will see you next time.